just while you need to plan, I don't think sit on it for a very long time. Just take the plunge, right? Because mentally that also means that you probably have to elevate your risk appetite. So right, so I would say don't sit on that for a very long time, because it's like losing. It's like an opportunity cost, right? So start early if you can, take the plunge, and and I think keeping the focus is very, very important, because when you are in a corporate job, you have a very clear framework. You have a clear defined scope. But then suddenly when you are out there, it's like, you're moving away from a pond to an ocean.
And for me, the question over there is there a passion which you have? If you have a passion, then you should have jumped yesterday. If you don't have a passion, whether you will jump or not is going to be an ongoing discussion you will do for years till it becomes inevitable for you. So you need to first figure out, and it goes back to the identity point which I made earlier. How do you want to define yourself? Okay, if you are willing to junk your visiting card, who are you? Or what do you want to be? If you have found an answer to that question, that passion will drive you to move. If you haven't found an answer to the question, you need to figure out what else is going to define you.
Hi, welcome to another episode of our podcast series. I'm Suman Ghose, and with me is Atul Nath. We are your hosts for this podcast. In this podcast series, we learn from people who have made a successful transition to their second innings. Transitioning to a second innings requires taking risks and even stepping outside of societal norms. Telling and listening to such stories helps all of us. And today we have a couple of great and interesting guests with us in this episode to talk about their journeys. Malthi is a seasoned global product leader, startup mentor, and freelance product coach and trainer. She founded Spark Prod, a boutique product consulting firm, and is fractional chief product officer at Herkey. She has more than 2 decades of professional experience in building global software products, working with PayPal, Societe Generale, Intuit, SAP, and EMC. She's a visiting faculty at IIM Udaipur and Masters Union. Early this year, she was awarded Women Leader of the Year for Product Management by Gain Skills India. Welcome, Malthi.
Thank you so much, Suman, for the kind introduction and for having me here.
Great. Next, we have Dr. Prakash Bagri. Dr. Prakash Bagri is a renowned academic and industry expert with over 3 decades of experience in innovation, technology commercialization, and business transformation. He has held several academic positions at the Indian Institute of Business and served as adjunct faculty at IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Bangalore, and IIM Calcutta. Prior to this, Prakash held senior leadership roles at Intel and Unilever. He holds a doctorate from Singapore Management University, an MBA from IIM Bangalore, and a degree from IIT Kharagpur. Welcome, Prakash.
Thanks, Suman. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's start by talking a little bit about each of you. We've got pretty good, what should I call it, a demographic introduction of each of you in terms of where you're coming from, etc. Would love to hear a little bit more of of yourselves in your own words, in terms of your upbringing, your early growing up years, where you came from, etc., etc. So, Malthi, we can start with you. If you would just tell us about yourself a little bit, please.
Sure. So Atul, I've been, in terms of my growing up years and just being around, right? I've been pretty much a little bit all over the place. So I was the third generation Tamilian who was born and raised up in Delhi, right? And a very typical Tambram community where, having a government job, and I've seen my grandfather, my dad kind of living through that, right? So fast forward a little bit. So I did my school graduation, everything in Delhi. I'm a botany graduate. Yeah. And this was the phase when the whole computer internet in the late 90s was just booming up. And while I was in my first year of college, I thought probably, I wanted to become a professor of botany. I think I was very highly influenced by my biology teacher. That's why I picked up botany. And very soon, by the second year, I realized that, okay, this is too dry a subject, that is not something I can pursue forever. And at that point of time, we had a lot of these computer academics like NIIT and AppTech, which had mushroomed up all over, who were promising very interesting and high-paying jobs with a 2-year course. And I just signed up for that 3-year course with NIIT, which I started in my second year of college. And eventually, that only became my bread and butter for the rest of my life, right? The course that I did. So after I finished my course at NIIT, I actually picked up teaching at NIIT. And I'll come back to this why. And also some very interesting anecdote is that I come from a family of teacher. My mom used to be a government school teacher. I think I did that job with NIIT for about 6 months, and I realized that, okay, everybody else seems to be doing much more interesting job of creating software, whereas I am, after 2 batches, losing up that zeal of teaching the same thing again and again and again. So I said, okay, I want to now transition into software development, right? And that's when how I find my first job was also very interesting, right? I think there was one career fair which was happening in Pragati Maidan in Delhi, where I landed up, and I was pushed by my friend that, just go. I mean, it's okay to just go and distribute your resumes, hard copy of your resumes to everybody. So there was this stall at HCL Technologies, and there was this gentleman who must have been in a senior manager kind of a profile. And he looked at my resume and said, okay, very interesting. Why don't you come and meet me at HCL Tech? And I think that was the first time I pushed myself to go and meet, go to a stranger and say, hey, this is my profile, have a look at it. But I think that was a very, very important day and a step that I took, because that literally changed my entire trajectory, right? I visited HCL Tech in Noida and managed to get a job as an intern for the first 3 months, and pretty much then started my career. So then for the next 2-3 years, I stayed up with HCL Technologies, and this was also the time when Y2K happened. And suddenly, after the dot-com burst, all the Java, all the visual basic job seems to have dried up. And I remember one of our senior leaders coming and saying that you all have to now transition into SAP technologies. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee whether you will have a job 2 months down the line or not. Right? And I remember from a very fancy Visual Basic studio, I had to transition to SAP 3.1H in our proprietary language of SAP, which is ABAP. So that's where I think my pure play software development journey started. I joined SAP Labs India as a developer, and kind of grew up the ranks over there. That was also the time, during the I think the second half of my journey with SAP Labs India is where there was one random job posting that I saw which said product management. And I said, okay, how different can it be? I think I can figure it out, because I knew project management. So I said, how different can be one PM from another PM? And I would say I was an accidental product manager without really knowing. So I think that was a very pivotal moment in my career. And I'm so glad that I took that plunge 16, 17 years ago, because I still continue to do the same thing. And this particular role has been very fascinating, because every day I have a new challenge.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me to keep going.
So Malti, I think I'm sorry, I'm just going to interject there real quickly. I think that your passion for product management and product marketing comes through very, very strongly. And we are going to talk a lot about that, because you've used that passion to kind of, develop your transition and go in and newer directions. I just want to go back. So I'm sorry, I'm going to rewind maybe 20 years in your life and
Sure.
just talk about for a half a minute or maybe a minute about what it was like culturally and sociologically growing up in Delhi for you, while your family background is very non-Delhi, if I may call it that, right? So what was it like in terms of your interactions with your friends, with other people in school and so on and so forth? How did that kind of pan out for you?
I think while it was growing up, see, I think from the background where I come in, I think one thing which is very core to our ethos is two things I would say. One is education. No matter what you like to do, you need to have a solid education, right? That was very given. And I think there is no alternative to hard work, right? I mean, I saw my mom, for example, being a teacher during the morning hours and a tuition teacher in the second half of the day. But I think two things which it really helped me Delhi was that being very outspoken, right? And I think being confident, like even then or even today, starting a conversation with somebody I don't know is not a challenge for me at all. And I think that comes to me from the roughness of having grown up in Delhi.
That's a very interesting. That's a very interesting thought you bring up, because I mean, it isn't necessarily true that all Delhiites are like that, but the fact that you picked that up as a trait, and you're looking back and saying that that became a very important part of who you are today, and it's given you that sense of confidence and a sense of outspokenness, if I can call it that. Let's jump across to Prakash. If I could request you, Prakash, to just talk about yourself for a few minutes and tell us about your origin years.
Okay, my origin years. I think I'm still in my origin years, but nonetheless, let me try. So I was born in Calcutta. I am not a Bengali. I'm a sixth generation Calcuttan, as I still call myself, and I still call my town of birth as Calcutta, and nothing on earth will make me change that. I come from a family of businessmen, and at the same time, yes, there was a great value in terms of getting an education, and therefore one found oneself in the classic convent education mode in Calcutta. With the those were the best of times when you had the best of teachers around you, and a lot of life during the initial days was basically, it used to happen by itself, things. Okay, so because you were in this school, you were participating in this, etc. I ended up doing a lot of what I finally realized is called sock cult. When I moved in one fine day, I found that my classmates were preparing for this examination, so got into the groove, landed up with an engineering admission, and went into the boondocks, the back of beyond, a place called Kharagpur. And I've always been a large city person, so it was a bit of a change. Interestingly, I did my engineering in what we used to call as aeronautical engineering in those days. It happened in my final year in vocational training. The only aircraft I seem to have touched in my life to some extent was at the design stage itself, was when I was doing my vocational training, and I landed up in Bangalore. And that was what was called as LCA in those days. The biggest gain of that 2-month stint in Bangalore was I decided whatever happens in life will happen around Bangalore. And so to that extent, I landed up over here to do my MBA, despite having a few other options. Not only did I land up over here, I even made a mistake of asking for this as my preferred location when I joined Levers, which therefore meant that I was sent to the boondocks in Bihar and UP and spent 2 years understanding that part of the country. But I finally did manage to come back to Bangalore. And life has always revolved around over here, including when I was doing a US stint in Intel, as well as for the past 5 years when I was working in ISP. So yeah, ended up doing an MBA and decided that yes, I might have had a career in sales and marketing. I joined Hindustan Lever, and I was assigned to a company called Brook Bond in this beautiful place called Brookfields. Brook Bond then changed to Brook Bond Lipton, which then changed to Hindustan Lever, which then changed to Hindustan Unilever, and I said I had enough. So after 8 years in in that place when I managed to see the length and breadth of India, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, etc., cities, villages, spent 3 months in Rajasthan in the sweltering heat, actually selling tea using a tanga and with a hand-pulled cart. In the process, managed to work with 5 different distribution systems, seeded 3 more, and got some degree of exposure into what really is India. But nonetheless, it was about 8 odd years. Things got a bit boring. A new opportunity came, and I decided to jump ship. And that was a company called Intel. And within a couple of months, the dot-com boom was announced. Okay, and it suddenly became really. This was at the turn of the century. It suddenly became very, very exciting to be a part of the tech sector. So, you would land up somewhere and people would say, hey, wow, how did you figure it out? And, these are the rare opportunities you'll get in life where you have greatness thrust on you. So I had to figure out a real, smart answer. So while I was trying to figure out that smart answer, and I thought I had it ready, the dot-com bust happened. And just when you wanted to answer the question, hey, how did you land up over there? You realize that people were asking it with a different tone. Hey, what happened? Why did you land up over here? So one of the things I always figured out as a consequence of that is some things which work out, some things which don't work out. But anyway, I did find myself in Intel. Amazing experience for 12 years. Worked across multiple different roles, multiple different responsibilities. Started in sales and marketing, went on to drive the business, came back to drive strategy and marketing, came back, continued, and you reached about a dozen years, and over the last year and a half, it did seem that, okay, it was more of the same. And that's when I decided to take a break. And I did want to kind of get back into and spend a couple of years in academia and also kind of reconfigure yourself. So that was the simple reason why I decided to take a longish sabbatical break for 2 years and start teaching. And I landed up with my alma mater in IIM Bangalore, and then from there moved on to teaching in IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Calcutta, Malthi. Yes, did some interesting experiences over there. This was supposed to be 2 years, but somehow the other just carried on. And I realized I was liking it. And it was a chance conversation with a senior faculty of IIM Calcutta. He and I were traveling in the same flight from Ahmedabad to Calcutta, and we are sitting together, and he was asking me what my plans are. And this was about 4-5 years into academia. The 2 years had become 3-4 years already. And he said what my plans were. And that's when I realized that, I'm kind of enjoying this. So he said, what, I haven't really figured it out, but I'm kind of enjoying this. And that's when he made a very profound statement. He said, listen, if you want to play a game, there's time when you have to move away from the sidelines and you have to get into the field. And that's when I decided that, okay, makes sense, and started looking around and finally ended up enrolling for a PhD. So I did my PhD at the age of 50. And then for the past 6 years, again, I did a full-time role as an academic. But in the meantime, always one of the things which has ended up defining me is I do like to try out new things. So instead of choosing the path of having one particular area of my focus, I realize if I look at it in terms of a cadence, I tend to follow Moore's law. And every 18 months or so, I figure out that I want to do something different and new. So over the past almost, it's going to be 15 years as an academic now, I do realize that I've kind of moved across multiple areas and themes as my focus. So that's basically me. And we are at the crossroads where I'm trying to again rediscover as to what is going to be not just second innings, most likely third or fourth innings, depending upon how you call it.
One place to start could be the transition itself, right? So when you actually make a move, you take the plunge. What are the what was going through? What were your drivers? Any impediments? What challenges did you face on the cognitive side? Also on the emotional side, what were you experiencing? What was the emotions going through you, right? When you actually did that change. So maybe we'll start with you, Prakash.
Oh, so it's hard to describe the emotions part of it. I'll give you a few examples, but I think the more cognitive challenges were uh, the first shift from Intel, actually even from levers coming to Intel. In levers you had a dedicated assistant. And Intel, the first major shock was you had one assistant across 15 people. And how do you manage this? And you have to realize that, okay, it was almost like the classical old school to new school, that you really don't need to get someone to type out your letters for you. You can send it yourself and stuff like that. So it was as basic as that. But moving out on your own, the fact that
Yeah.
things like travel, etc., have to be planned, and by which time, thankfully, the Intel years made one completely a prisoner of one's calendar. So, and then you move out of the situation where you're dealing with people who are not so specific about calendars. And yes, you have had to agreement in terms of a time and place, but some of the other, it's not there on the calendar, and you land up in a different place, etc. You're not there and stuff like that. So that's taken a lot of getting used to, honestly speaking. So it's been mostly these part of it. Uh, at the emotional part, I think there are a few things which become important. Number one, how much do you really work on a plan? And I realized that actually I work more on a plan now. In the sense, I don't do everything minute to minute. But the fact is, when you're going to work on a daily basis, that going becomes your plan, not the work which you do over there or the output which you have actually created. But when you're on your own, how you evaluate what you have done is basically, okay, I was supposed to create this content. I'm going to be speaking with these executives. Do I know what exactly is required? So the specifics of what is expected out of you by yourself becomes far more objective, if I might say so. Okay, it's because you're not doing a role per se. The softer part of it is you also get a chance to explore and identify yourself. And this was a bit of an eye opener. This was a bit of a, I won't say shock, but a realization. After I quit, 2011 I'm talking about, and then you would land up in a social gathering or in an airport meeting people, etc. And if you were asked the question, what do you do? It's a very Indian thing. A 42-year-old in 2011 to say, what do you do? And there are two options. Number one, you say, you're a part-time faculty over there. And then it is immediately translated, oh, you're teaching. Okay. And there's a different kind of tonality to it. So I decided to also kind of enjoy it the other way. And when people asked me, what do you do? I said, oh, nothing. And the kind of reactions, if you can go through the initial emotional period of that, was actually a study of human behavior. And for that, for me, that became an amazing pastime. And the reason I could do it was because, When I spend a sizable amount of time in California with my colleagues in US, if you would go out for a drink in the evening, and if we were asking each other, or even with my colleagues in Europe or Australia, etc., if you asked each other what do you do, no one really used their designation. Someone would go river rafting, someone was out there building ships inside a bottle, someone else was taking care of an elderly or an invalid sibling or an elderly parent or children with special needs. Their definition in life was never their designation. And for me, that became a kind of a differentiating point as to, whatever I'm doing, I need to be able to figure out how that is energizing and uplifting rather than a description of what I am. So I'm sorry, I kind of went into a bit of a digression over here, but there are different ways of looking at things when you haven't really planned it out. It allows you to explore it with a bit more of an open mind, and that's been my philosophy ever since.
Prakash, I don't think it's a digression at all. In fact, I would say it in many ways hits at the heart of the matter um, of identity. And this is something Suman and I have discussed. In fact, a seed of the Second Innings podcast actually came from there, where I was going through a career transition of my own. I've never worked in a corporate. Straight after B school, I became an entrepreneur. I ran my business called Candid Marketing for whatever 25 odd years, and then I've done a few things apart from that. A new venture which didn't work well. In fact, didn't work well at all, so I had to shut it down last year. And Suman and I started talking at that point, and one of the key things we talked about in my context was this whole identity question, that we have a very strong sense of defining ourselves as individuals as what we do. Now, I don't know whether this is a very Indian thing. From the stories you're telling, it seems to be, and my experience has been that too. But I think this really hits at the heart of the matter, because a lot of people don't do what we are calling a second innings transition of going away from doing what they did into something else, because of the fact that there is such a massive loss of identity, that you rather stick to the knitting of what you do and say, this is what I do. I work in product in Flipkart, for example, or I work in marketing in Hindustan Unilever. That completely defines the person straight away. Nobody needs to ask any more questions. Whereas if you say, I run a marketing services company, there's about 10 questions that come after that. Or like you said, I teach. That then there's 5 questions. What do you teach? Where do you teach? Which institute, and whatever. So I think it's you've hit upon quite an important aspect. Suman.
No, I completely agree, and it's good that this identity thing came up, and we'll talk more about it. So maybe Malti, you can tell us a bit about. And again, I'm also looking at the actual transition, right, from what I call the cold state to the hot state. Cold state is all very fine, it's all rational, but when you actually have to take the plunge, there's a lot going through, right, within us.
Yeah.
Identity may be one of them, right? So what was your experience like?
So I think for me it was more of the fatigueness of doing the same thing year after year. And so I think I just want to kind of take on that identity point, right? For me, it was came from home, basically from my parents, because they said that, you have built this career over a period of time. If you don't do this, what else are you going to do? So they were very, very shocked. And I think there was a lot of inertia from them to say that why their daughter will leave a well-paying job and decide to pursue something where she doesn't even know where the source of income is going to come from. So for me, that was one of the biggest, I would say, questions that came from within the family. But coming back to the question that you asked, Suman, I think I was sitting on the fence for almost like 4 years, which was further prolonged because of COVID. If COVID wouldn't have happened, probably I would have taken this plunge in early 2020. So for me, there were a few drivers. One was, I think, this whole FOMO, because I always worked in big, large companies. I have never worked in the startup ecosystem firsthand. So there was this FOMO that I wanted to experience. So that was one. The second thing was that since most part of my career I have worked with MNCs, the headquarters have been somewhere else. So that always means that there is a lot of management that you do up, down, peers, right? So somewhere I felt uh, there is there is not enough creativity that I am able to still operate, right? I mean, especially as you grow up the ladder, it is a lot more about operational aspects. It is more about expectations management. So I think somewhere within me, I was feeling I was not able to do enough with my creative aspirations, right? And there were, of course, more around life stage that I was in, where my kids were kind of ready to get into college, parents were aging up. So it was kind of a lot of these things coming together. But I think what held me back was the uncertainty. So I think one of the things which I will go with very much what Prakash was saying, was that I was kind of a little reluctant. How will this exploratory phase going to be? Right? So I had acquired a fair amount of skills, craft as my day job. I was not sure what would this translate in terms of an offering, for example. I knew that I wanted to do something where I can be very hands-on. I get to, build things from scratch. But I think the financial aspect, the uncertainty of what exactly am I going to be doing, that part. And I think this is somewhere because I was also tying it to my identity, right? Because I was so used to say that I am X person working with this company at that designation, right? So I think those were some things where I kept on delaying my transition. And I think there was somewhere a tipping point where I said, okay, I have to do this now for myself, give myself a couple of years. And I think my husband, by then, with all my cribbing of what I'm not able to do, had already given up. He said, just go and take the plunge and we'll figure it out, whatever it is. So those were the different things that were going on, and actually for the next 3-4 months, right? I mean, and I actually, I had a pretty long notice period, right? And it was a very difficult question, because typically when you're leaving, people are expecting you are taking up either a next job, or you have something defined for yourself. And it was one of those difficult questions where anybody asked me, okay, so what's next? And I'm saying, I don't know yet, right? So yeah, those were some of the things. And pretty much after I took the plunge, I think for the first 4 months, all I did was just talk to people, and just figure out, where do I find my purpose? So I was doing very small ticket experimentations to say that, is this something am I liking? Is this something I think I want to spend next few years doing? So that's how my transition happened.
Super. I'm so glad you mentioned this thing about being a fence sitter, because my experience has been very similar. Because I think I was a fence sitter for just as long, maybe longer, maybe 5 years, right? And sometimes I look back and say, hey, why was I sitting on the fence for that long? And to me also, I think it was FOMO. So, I can that completely resonates with me. Had worked for over 20 years, right? It was a bit of fatigue. So all of them actually, the tipping point for me was this fear of failure, which I always was gripped with. At some point, I think the fear of regret became even bigger. I said, let me not do another 10 years and then look back and regret it. So yeah. In fact, when Atul and I were talking about this, what Atul mentioned some time back, we realized that we came from very different worlds. He was an entrepreneur. He had never worked in corporate. I had worked for over 20 years. Even though we came from very, very different worlds, looking forward, it seemed to be aligned, because we all want passion, joy, purpose, time to do things, all that stuff, right? And that's why we decided to kind of talk to people like yourselves to figure out, what are the thought processes.
On a
I love the
humorous,
language you said. Sorry,
on
no,
a humorous.
I love that.
Go ahead, Malthi.
I was just summarizing that line. He said that the fear of failure was kind of over, you kind of had that fear of regret superseded that. I think that's a fantastic line.
On a humorous note, both of you mentioned FOMO as of being doing something other than a corporate, and I wouldn't say FOMO, but I've always had this feeling of I wonder what a corporate career is like. All three of you have spent many years in corporate. I have no idea, and maybe all three of you, most people do, and maybe all three of you will turn around and say you don't want to find out. But I often feel that I wouldn't mind spending a month or so working in a large corporate and figuring out how that works and
Well, you
what are the
won't find
inputs.
anything out in 1 month, Atul. You'll just be going through the
Okay.
orientation for 6 months.
Okay.
That's right.
Maybe that's a good reason not to do it.
I think, Atul, you mentioned one thing which I thought was very interesting. Atul, in our talks, he said, the problem is I've always been the number one in the company where I work.
Yeah.
So I was not surrounded by people who are as good or even better than me. And I think that's
Mm.
something that you definitely get in corporate, when we
I
reflect back. Yeah.
I agree. In fact, I have never been to any of the top colleges or schools, but I think one thing which has helped me going is being surrounded with people smarter than myself. I think I have definitely big time benefited with that.
But if you're a true Tambram, then not too many people probably would be smarter than you.
Exactly.
Coming from a
Thank
Bengali,
you for that.
that's rather sharp.
Yeah,
I
I
would
think
say.
he'll be ostracized in Calcutta. but
Great.
but
That is
as
I
you
that
said,
is
think
very
a
coming from a
Calcutta.
Bengali, coming from a Bengali, I think I assume that you're referring to Prakash.
No, but I think I'll put the smarter part of what you said, Malti, aside, because our definition of smarter also is depends upon how we look at it. I
Hmm.
think the biggest thing which you gain in a setup where you have different people coming together is the confluence of differences.
I
And
agree.
that's what drives innovation. And
Right.
I'm sorry, it's the academic in me kind of barging in. Uh, and therefore, you find when organizations become too rigid and everyone starts speaking the same org speak, etc., and the meetings are nothing but a jargon fest, not much comes out of it. So it's not about uh, big or small. It's about, am I able to bring in the differences together and harness it in order to drive something which adds on to us? And I always figure out that as long as I'm getting that discussion, I learn everything. There might be something I'm teaching for 20 years now, or 15, but if in the class I get a few people who actually voice a difference in opinion, it allows me a chance to kind of look into it. But if I land up in a classroom where either they are not engaged or it's a group of senior executives who tell us, no, it doesn't happen like this. It is too theoretical. You realize that you're not going to be able to push them down because their minds are closed to the fact that maybe there's a different possibility around over there. So I think that's for me very important. I do like that challenge of someone questioning, and
Agreed.
that at times you miss when you're working on your own.
Yeah.
Agreed.
very much
Completely.
so.
And going back to the definition that I was saying, right? I mean, the point that when you're sitting with few people in a room and right, and when somebody said that this is what they have observed and this is what we should do, I think putting on that lens of okay, oh, that's a great way of looking at things, and then synthesizing that hypothesis or whatever your decision that you are making, right? So that is, I mean, those are the little nuggets I would say that I looked at a lot of different people around me and try to embrace in my own way of working. So for me, on the job learning and learning it from people all around me at different stages of life has been very very important. And now today I have been now an academician, part-time academician for about 3 years now, and there is a tons that I'm learning from the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas. And yeah, you're right that
I
way.
might ask, Malti, what are you teaching? Product management or?
I teach product
Oh,
management. Yeah.
wow. Yeah. That's the hot subject everyone wants to know about. Yeah.
Yes, yes, no doubt that. No doubt about that.
You mentioned, Mati, when you were talking about your transition, you mentioned the financial piece about how you kind of wanted to make sure that financially things would not get impacted or affected too strongly and too hard. So, would love to hear a little bit about what is it in terms of preparation that you kind of put together, some thoughts. How did you go about kind of getting ready for the difference in financial part of your life in the transition?
Yeah, so it was actually a very thoughtful, like a process that we underwent, and I have to, I did this with my family, primarily with my spouse, right? And I remember looking at some YouTube videos which said that for so many months of salaries you should definitely have in your bank account, right? So I think it kind of gives you also the confidence, right? If I have that kind of a corpus, it is fair for me to say that I have, like, say, a 2 year runway or a 1 year runway. And that also means somewhere your expenses have to be managed with your inflow kind of coming down. So so those were definitely some conversations I had with my family, not only with my husband, but with my kids. We kind of figured out, what does that mean, let's say, for our international travels. We are a family of who loves to travel. We do umpteen number of road trips and stuff like that. So those were things which we kind of
Yeah.
not very in detail planned, but at least we had some kind of guiding principles which we said these kind of things might have to be delayed or have to be slowed down. But I think one couple of things which were very important, Atul, was that there was a threshold that we had, that if today it is X, I can probably, let's say, go up to 1/5 of the X for the next 1 year for us to sustain and figure out whatever I'm trying to do differently on my own. Will this sustain? Will this try? Because we still have a lot of milestones, like lifestone milestone, whether it is education and other such
Were
objectives.
these thresholds numerically defined, or were they just general placeholders or kind of thing in your head?
No, we did have a range of numericals. We did.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So
Yeah,
you thought that through in terms of
we did.
because we've spoken to to both all kinds of people on that spectrum, people who are like you, relatively well planned, and then on the other side less so. So please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, yeah. No. I mean, because as I said, there are still responsibilities and things. So it couldn't have been very black and white saying that these things. And I think somewhere the part that both of us contribute to the family, financially, kind of helped because one person was still doing the job, right? But yeah, I mean, I think one thing which I was very, I would say, careful, and it was a very thoughtful decision, was that, and this was a question a lot of people asked me. They thought once I left my day job, I would do my own startup and I would start building a product on my own. Versus my thought process was very clear. I wanted to get into consulting. Primarily, I wanted to experience working with a very diverse set of people. I wanted to work on deep tech technology. I wanted to work on products being built for India, from healthcare, agriculture, diversity and inclusion. So that was also, a lot of people were slightly surprised, I would say, because many of them thought I would go and start my own product. But because I knew that I'm going to be consulting, there is going to be a fair inflow that will keep coming in, was something that helped me to do this kind of a planning. And yeah, I mean, I think that helped because, again, another aspect which I kind of did in my this thing was that I did not want to put my eggs in one basket. So that's why I kind of divided that I would go into teaching, I would go into consulting, not only with startups, but also with large organizations, because primarily my experience coming with running large teams, large scale products, millions of users. So that was again a very thoughtful decision that I took, that I want to kind of have multiple streams, which I wanted to explore.
So that was a great plan, to start with. But in reality, was it different? Was the plan versus actual, was it different? And if so, any stories you would like to share?
Yeah, I think I would say multiple things here. I mean, while I kind of did like the Uber umbrella, if you ask me, I was not very confident about the specifics,
Mm,
right? So I think the first 3, 4 months, Suman, And I was like surprised with every conversations I had. I didn't know these kind of business models existed. I didn't know these kind of products existed. I didn't know these kind of needs people had, whether it was for leadership coaching. For example, I've been doing mentoring for many, many years now. But I didn't even know whether people wanted to pay for such kind of things. Right? So for me, it was very, how do I say, it was new revelations, new discoveries with every single conversations that I had. And I think that was very helpful. So, but to answer your question, largely, the buckets still exist. That is how even today I operate. But I think the specifics has something that I have let it free flow, explore, figure out. Because for me, it is very important that I enjoy it. Because I am doing it with my own will. So if there are things which might be very, from an opportunity perspective, might sound very impressive, but if I'm not enjoying it, then I let it go. And that sometimes is very hard, right? Because that might make a dent on your pocket. But since I've taken this route, I really want to make sure that I enjoy it. It aligns to my overall thought process. I have time for doing things that I really enjoy. It has stayed that way.
It's interesting you talked about, and to quote you, said, I must enjoy it. Um, is somewhere the the connection of enjoy it with purpose, passion? Are there connections there? And if yes, then what was it that was kind of your purpose and passion that you felt you would be able to fulfill and enjoy what you were doing?
Right. So I think one was for me was learning, constant learning. That is very, very important, right? So for example, before I started my own thing, I had a very defined scope of things to do. And I had this whole supporting teams which would do those rest of the things, for example, go to market, sales, right? But when I started to do things on my own, I, from an errand lady in my company to the CEO, I am everything, right? So there was tremendous amount of learning that happened with everything, right? Even if I talk about podcasting, right? Even how to do these edits, which I had no clue about. So I think the main thing was to really learn whatever I do, right? That was one thing. And the second thing, as I said, was that I really wanted to kind of go more grassroots in terms of building products for India, right? And tying it back to my own interest. For example, since 2015-16, I have been a very, very, volunteered in a lot of diversity and inclusion initiatives in the organizations that I worked, right? So anything which talks about, gender diversity, larger theme of inclusivity, it's an area of very, very high passion. That's number one. Number two, sharing my own thought process and giving it back to the community, whether it is through teaching, whether it is through conversations. That is another area of my passion. And the startups with whom I work, the the panel discussions or whatever speaking opportunities that I have, they all have to tie it back to these two things: my learning and my diversity and inclusion passion.
So one thing I'm taking away from this is that a passion could be a topic like DNI, or maybe product management was a passion for you. But at the same time, a trait like constant learning is probably the underlying driver for everything, right? And that
Yes,
probably ties back to the fatigue and the FOMO that you talked about and creative aspirations,
yes,
isn't it?
that is
So a
correct.
leadership trait can also be a passion, right? So
Yes,
that's interesting.
absolutely, absolutely.
Prakash, do you have any thoughts on your driver? The story you told us about the transition you made, and you didn't go straight away from, being in IBM to, Intel to going into being an academician. But was there a purpose or a passion or something of that nature driving you, or was that something you found as you went along?
It's surprising when I made the shift, it was almost like you were doing it because it wasn't that overt that, yes, I want to do it and stuff like that. But what really appeared very surprising to me was my team and colleagues were not that surprised. And if
Really?
I played back, one of my first managers uh, used to call me professor. Another earlier manager used to call me doctor. Uh, someone else used to call me IAS officer. So I don't know. I used to take it as a bit of a, am I being too rigid kind of stuff as of that time. But generally, and as I've played that back in my minds, my approach has always been a bit more structured, and maybe that comes naturally to me. I tend to see things in a form of a framework, etc. And I was doing the same thing even during all the projects as well as campaigns and initiatives that I launched during my own corporate career. So it's like maybe I was the only person who didn't know about it, and the others had more clarity out of it, and therefore I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it in my own way, and that's what has kept me over here. The other thing which I've realized in life is I don't like doing stuff if I'm not enjoying it. And it takes a different avatar every time. Uh, that yes, I didn't like the fact that I was there in a company where my career was mapped out for the next 30 years. I never knew it as of that time, but that was the only motivation for me to leave. Okay, I was here in a company where I had spent 12 years supposedly doing okay, but then I had to go and spend so many years over there for me to come back and do the next job. That kind of felt again. It wasn't very overt over there, but the fact that it was now moving into a particular direction perhaps didn't work with my DNA. And there are things which happen, subliminally. I've come to that realization that and therefore I don't try to explain everything, but we always kind of find our purpose in that sense. One of the things which has certainly been important for me is what kind of work am I doing? The ethics part of it, uh, and the kind of work environment which is there becomes very, very important for me. And I think that comes a lot from our upbringing in a classical middle class household. I think in Calcutta, certainly, at least the Calcutta of my childhood, these things mattered a lot. And that's some of the other. And then I joined a company which in those days was basically a paragon of it themselves. So the fact that it made us work made me spend 2 months in a village in order to learn the ground, the brass tacks, as we would say. Uh, these things kind of became a part of your foundation of what you will do and what you will not do moving forward, and that's kind of ruled it out. Yeah.
So I think sometimes, at least this has been in my case, Suman, that sometimes there are those events, there are those circumstances which kind of evolve, which kind of strengthens your fire in the belly to say that no, this is something that I want to do differently. So I think the how big that fire in the belly is, I think there are a lot of times those trigger points that happens in different stages of your life. I think that triggers you, because at least in my case, I don't think I ever thought that I'm going to become a solopreneur or I will ever do this. I think I love the fact that, I have a job where I'm doing fairly okay. It helps me to have a good work-life balance. I have a financially I'm kind of stable. So I don't think I ever thought, but I think for me, there was one person who very, very profoundly influenced my career, where my manager asked me to push me. He said there is a lot of potential for you, just what you do in the day job, and I think it makes sense for you to build a personal brand out there. And if you ask me, when I started in 2022, this exercise which he had pushed me to do in 2019, I was actually reaping the benefits. Right? So sometimes you need to find that person, that event, or or maybe sometimes a combination of many of such small things, which kind of pushes you out of that fence to take that leap of faith.
Yeah.
Has it been different for any of you? I mean, or is what more impulsive?
For me, it's actually, I won't call it impulsive in hindsight, but I think for me, it doesn't work the way that I have this purpose and then I'm doing it. I think purpose, or even if you look at culture and things like that, they form. They are like stalactites and stalagmites, and obviously there are some of those germs which are there, which kind of lead them in a particular way. And for me, it's only much later that it gets codified that this is what is important. For example, you talked about DEI, and for me, the inclusive part of it is far more important, and that comes from having had a very close friend and a batchmate who was basically a cheerleader in terms of how do organizations make themselves more inclusive in terms of dealing with people with disabilities. And for me, that became a cause over a period of time, and I didn't know that. But nowadays, when I get a chance in an organization, I walk into an institution, and at times I'm almost caustic and scathing in terms of my commentary and evaluation of how inclusive they are or not. And it's not that it's there codified as a part of my purpose, but I know I'm moved in that direction. So for me, I find it more, and yes, what you said, I completely agree with. We find layers emerging as we evolve in our own lives. Okay, there's something which may not have been possible or may not have been in your frame of reference earlier, but now it becomes an integral part of defining what you do and how you do, etc.
Yeah, completely. It makes so much of difference, and I think that's, I would say, Suman or Atul, for you also, these layers of discovery and kind of building on your knowledge and skills over the years is what kind of sometimes leads you to your direction where you want to advance, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to listen to the way you're kind of framing the whole thing here. See, for me, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I started off as an entrepreneur very early in my life. I think I was about maybe 23 or 24 years old when I started, as 24 years old when I started as an entrepreneur. And frankly, I don't think I was either emotionally or uh, practically really prepared for it. I found my feet as I went along in the first few years. What was interesting was that when I started, my intent was that, how they say, I want to define my own future rather than an organization. And many of you say that as well. It was actually, I realized over maybe about a decade or so, maybe 8 or 10 years or so, that actually that was not necessarily the case. Because when I've created an organization, then that organization becomes very often the limiting factor to what I can or cannot do. Because I've built culture, I've built values, I've built a certain business ethos, apart from the product, etc., the services that we've defined. And steering that is not as easy as you may think. even in a small organization, we were about, about 150 people after about 10 years. And to change culture and values and introducing a new product line or a service line was really, really difficult beyond a point. And, that became a limiting factor. And that's something that I didn't enjoy beyond a point. And which is why when I started breaking the molds and, started thinking about how can I redefine this and how can I do something different, and a little bit like the Moore's law you were talking about, Prakash, that, how do I kind of do something which redefines me? It's not the ship of Theseus kind of approach that, how does this become different from what otherwise it's, your innovation doesn't happen. You're just going down a trajectory and what it is. The reason I'm kind of talking about this, Malti, is to your point about what is it that defines purpose and passion and what you want to do is very often a gut feel for me personally, that this feels right and I want to do this. And then joining the dots a little bit behind me as I keep going along and picking up the crumbs and saying, this makes sense. So let me move a little bit here and a little bit here and so on. So it's not always planned in that sense for me. It's a little bit of, doing the right things, finding the right way, and then, a little bit of shooting and then aiming and then shooting again and then recalibrating, getting the aim right, and then kind of moving forward like that. That's how I've kind of, I don't know, it's a bit of an entrepreneurial approach I suppose.
Yeah. I actually have one question because this is something I'm kind of realizing myself. Do you think at different stages of your careers, especially being an entrepreneur, especially being a full-time corporate job versus your risk of your appetite of taking risks are fairly different, right? So as an entrepreneur, right, have you seen that also, the quotient of risk appetite also changing and evolving?
Definitely. For me personally, definitely. And I'll tell you, and not only is it a stage of life, it is a stage of entrepreneurial journey. And it's also how your aspirations, obviously this is very personal, right? Everybody doesn't have the same kind of life journey. But personally for me, aspirations have changed over time. So when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I started business because I thought I want to make lots of money because, as a business person, you make so much more money than as an employee in a corporate or whatever. That was the, and of course I wanted to create an organization that lasted forever. And after about 20 years, I was like, yeah, I've created India's #1 marketing services and brand activation agency. Brilliant. Now what? Right? So same thing happens in corporates, right? You reach a certain level and then you wonder what next. But to answer your question, yes, definitely risk appetite changes. Like I said, I was 24, when I started my journey as an entrepreneur. I used to live with my parents. Literally food was on the table when I came home because my mom put it over there. And I had no wife, no child, nothing. And, it was just work 7 days a week. Risk appetite was theek hai, goes wrong, big deal, job kar lenge, that kind of thing. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, in my case, risk appetite was high, came down, and then has gone high again. Now my risk appetite is very high has been in the last 5 years or so, because theek hai, second innings, maybe third innings, I don't know, something will happen, something we'll do, and it gets more connected to joy and meaningfulness, if I can call it that.
Yeah. Maybe one thing I want to touch upon, which is coming from a corporate to being on your own, right? Being on your own has its benefits, definitely, but it's also got its challenges. Sometimes it's very difficult for one person to kind of drive everything, and the importance of a partner is what I want to talk about. Like, certain collaborations for me has worked very well. I collaborated with a friend of mine to write a book that worked well. I'm collaborating with Atul on this. It's synergy. 2 + 2 is more than 4, right? At the same time, finding the right person is sometimes very, very challenging. The frequency doesn't match. 2 + 2 can become 1 or half, right? Any thoughts around that? And I mean, why is it you wanted to be on your own, or what are your thoughts when you want to collaborate, or do you think it'll be good to have a partner?
I think what you said, Suman, makes a lot of sense, and I'm kind of actually started wondering. Yes, there are quite a few projects, uh, at least three major projects, including a couple of books, which I've been wanting to do. And I know I have certain things I cannot funnel myself into transcribing it, and therefore it gets pushed down and stuff like that. And I think there's merit in what you said, being able to find the right partner. Even, for example, the consulting work which I do, etc. I
Hmm.
do more of the scoping out, understanding what the problem is, helping them figure it out. But yeah, if there was someone who would be doing more of the outreach part of it, that would be good. And it's not that you do one versus the other person does other. It's just that you understand where you are slightly lacking, and you bring in someone with strengths in that direction, and then there are areas where you do have commonalities. So it sounds perfect. Coming to think of it, I teach the role of partnerships in innovation, and I can find it out. When you said that, I realized, okay, I'm having this gap over here. Whom do I partner with? So yeah, you hit a important point over there, I think.
Yeah. In fact, for me, like, partnership at a smaller scale, even doing those little things of creating a Canva poster to doing that email coordination, right? So I still haven't, I would say, nailed that, but even somebody to take care of those tactical things so that I can rather use my time to focus on things where I can personally leverage and add value. That has been one. And then there have been times when, there is a new idea, there is something new you want to do, or you want to research on something and you want to just brainstorm with somebody, I think, or discuss something. So I've been so used to be part of a team or have a mentor at work or have a manager with whom I could, just use them as a sounding board, because they have the context, right? So now here I cannot give the complete context to somebody. So that part sometimes I do miss. And that was one of the reasons that I am now kind of opening up myself to collaborate with people who come with complementary skills, or their strength in slightly other areas which are not my strength, and see how we can collaborate so that we can create more magic together. But yes, being a solopreneur does comes with its own set of new things which we have not experienced in a corporate job.
Is that difficult to do when you're older? I wonder. To find the right people or the person to work with, that might be a challenge.
And people, what I meant by partner is a true partner who's coming at your level, right? Because that's also
Yeah,
becomes more challenging. Because
yeah.
otherwise, you want somebody to just get your work done. You can always hire a couple of people.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's true.
yeah.
I think getting a partner per se is perhaps, let me put it this way, to be able to have that, you can find project wise partners more specifically, but ask the question you asked, Atul, as we grow older, etc., being able to have that complete commonality of purpose with someone in terms of, this is what I'm wanting to do, are you also totally aligned, might become a bit more difficult. It's
Yeah.
I
far
guess
from
that has more relevance to finding a co-founder
finding,
rather than a partner
yeah,
for a
yeah.
project.
Whereas
Yeah.
it's when you're younger, uh, and you're more able to recognize that this person does this person does this, etc., and that none of those persons are supposedly so formed, and the reality is none of them have so high moats around them to
Mm.
accept it. So I don't know, for someone who hasn't got into a partnership, I think I'm now just pontificating for the heck of it. So I'll pause. But I think it,
No, but I'm glad you kind of highlighted the difference between a partner on a project versus a co-founder on a long-term enterprise kind of thing, because I think that's important. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's I was trying to look around to find examples, and I haven't.
Mm,
And you have, I'm sure all of us have our peer group who are saying, okay, I'm doing this startup now that, as Malti you said, it's fashionable and stuff like that, and then
mm,
they try to get a set of other partners, but then these partners are basically more like dormant partners or have put money over there, or they get a
mm,
set of younger people, which is always
mm,
advisable.
mm,
Or if they have got the same peer group of partners, things don't move as fast. Yes,
mm,
there are a few
mm,
exceptions like Big Basket and stuff like that, but they're not
mm,
that many, as I can see.
I agree. And just to kind of delve a little bit on the question that Atul asked, if you get older, does finding the right person with the right set of frequency and the wavelength to work together, I do think it does gets harder. You really have to work on yourself to be more open, to be more embracing, right? Because you, over a period of time, you have built your own way of working, the way your own thought process. It does take to unlearn a little bit of that and to be more open. Because I think in the last 2.5 years that I have been on this journey, uh, I have, as much as I have learned, I also have to say I also have unlearned a lot of things.
and that's a that's a very difficult trait to have in life. To unlearn things is far harder than to learn new
Yeah,
things, I feel,
yeah.
always.
Absolutely.
Someone, should we get on to the last couple of sections and talk about? Go ahead, please.
Okay, so if you had to do this all over again, what would you do differently and what would you do the same?
For me, it's easy. I think I would plan it a bit better. I think there's a bit of joy in just taking the plunge, but for example, building the brand, building your specific areas of expertise and stuff like that. I think there's a need to do a bit of a balance over there. And maybe I've been too much of the explorer part around over here. And I would have, but knowing me, I doubt whether I would have, but maybe I should have tried to plan it better.
And I'm surprised that it's coming from you, considering you were the structured one and you used to be called professor, right? So imagine for others
So
what.
my life is kind of, it's two parts of it. I'm far more structured in my work. Okay, and my corporate life was extremely structured, and therefore I balance it by being the adventurer in my personal life. So it's kind of
Ah, no.
very segmented that way.
Yeah, I think for me also, some part of that I would agree. While I kind of knew the larger theme, the larger space where I wanted to get in, I think if I would have done slightly better in terms of my a little bit of specific, not to the very granular level, but again, it could be a little contrarian view because I think I learned a lot just by being the explorer that I was and I am continuing to be. But probably I would done a little bit of more structure in terms of the way I organized myself. Because even today, for example, I'm a very impromptu person, right? I mean, especially I think in the last 2 years, I am literally going like week by week. It's not that I'm already planning, okay, 3 months down the line, what is that I want to do? Except for my courses, which are planned in a year, that this is the term that you're teaching. I think nothing else has been planned for me. And a lot of times when people ask me, okay, so Malti, tell me what's the end game? I really don't have an answer because I think I have leaned on this exploratory path far more. So maybe I would like to get a little bit more balance over there in terms of what I would do differently. But what I would do similarly, I don't think I would have done anything different in terms of being the explorer because it kind of unpacked a lot of new things for me. You kind of people I connected with. So I would I would just keep it the same way. I think just one more thing, and I think this is somewhere also I would give it to the gender part of me, is that I think I kind of gave away a lot of freebies. And then I realized that when you give away a lot of freebies, people don't value it, right? So somebody said that if you don't value your own time, how do you expect somebody else to value your time, right? So I think I did that for quite a lot in my initial year. Probably I would be a little bit more thoughtful about that if I had to do this all over again.
Malti, what you said resonates a lot. I think that's something I've learned the hard way, and I think that's a lesson which a couple of friends and acquaintances have brought to my notice more in the last few years. Uh, which is, I think you do get taken for a ride.
Exactly.
There are quite a few big business houses, etc., which have gained, and where the discussion on commercials never takes place, and that's because you never you were never really trained or oriented to ask for it. So, if I were to build on what Malti said, one of the first things which I would advise someone to do is get this part of it sorted out first. How do you take it to a logical commercial uh, part of it? Okay, if that's why you're doing it, and the to build upon that part of it is, if you're doing it for someone who's going to get commerce out of it, then there has to be a business engagement. Otherwise, I would rather do it as a charity or as a pro bono work. But then pro bono, doing it for a large enterprise just doesn't gel. You know,
I agree.
in fact, it happened 2 weeks ago. Someone asked me for something, and I kind of gave them a full outline. And then they said, okay, can you now take it to the next level and do it pro bono for us? And by the way, we are a unicorn. I said, just repeat. Does it even resonate to you? Well, it's a different matter that that person still took the IP and has not reverted back, but you always learn.
Yeah. And if you ask me, Prakash, I think one of the hardest part for me to learn in the last 2 years has been sales and marketing.
Yeah, that's what my career has been, but I've still not learned it when it comes to yourself.
Exactly. It's very hard.
Marketing yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to a bit of an overdose of your initial formative years. And it comes from that classical middle class values which are you're too deeply steeped with, where you don't talk about yourself and you expect what you have done to talk about it. I think in hindsight, that's kind of a shackle which has certainly helped me become what I have become, but it also kind of pulls you from getting and being a bit more aggressive about it. But Malti, you talked about the Delhi in you. I thought you shouldn't have had this problem.
Yeah, but I think that is where my Tambram kind of overrided the Delhi in me.
No, so my experience has been that two things that I've still not figured out. One is this freebies, as you call it. The other is pricing. Right? You never seem to get the pricing. It's the same thing. You have a certain price, and customer says, "Can you lower it?" The question is, am I going to walk away from it? Right? Because that customer is still important. Now, so over time, as we learn, as we get better, our freebies reduce. Right? You're probably able to command a price. Now, if somebody asks for something, will I still walk away? I don't know. But, I still might do something. But in my mind, I'm not calling it a freebie. I'm saying this is my marketing expense. Right? Isn't it a lot to do with how you're framing it to yourself as well?
Yes, you are right? Because I think but I think now one thing which is probably different, Suman, is that at that point of time, my experience was just to see how concretely am I able to provide value to, let's say, this particular startup, right? Versus today, I am also able to derive that, okay, what is that I can learn from them? Let's say it could be a technology. Let's say they could talk about me on some social media platform. So that output which I can derive from them is far more clearer than probably what it was 2 years back.
So you're looking at it more holistically now, basically.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
the tangibility, the specifics are more clearer.
Okay.
Not that I still don't do the freebies, there are still
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of those foods, but I'm very clear because I have only X number of hours in a week and I need to be mindful of where am I spending it, right? So I have become much more mindful, and believe me, that is another harder part, to say no, because everybody out there think that asking for 5 minutes or 20 minutes of your time should be okay for you, right? So and you want to kind of be nice to somebody who has taken the pain of reaching out to you, putting that entire context and saying that, hey, I would like to talk to you in 30 minutes. Whereas for me, it's a difficult thing to take out those 30 minutes for those 5 people who have reached out to me in that week. Why do I want to do that? So be respectful of the part that they have taken that initiative to reach out to you, but at the same time, keep going back to how do you want to spend your time? Where do you think is the most useful use of your own time? Is a very tight rope, I would say.
I can just add on over there. I think it's actually become very easy for me. And I think saying no is very energizing. It's uplifting. And I want to tell you why it happens. Malti, you also alluded to it. There's only so much time you have. You are a solopreneur, okay? And it also comes from a balance of what is it that you really need. So for me, the important thing is someone actually looking at it as a mandate which they're going to get out of me, or is it a brain hour which you're going to get out of me? And are you actually viewing the fact that there is going to be very solid inputs which you'll get in, not just for the 10 or 15 minutes, but that comes from 30 plus years of having synthesized it in a way that one can help you identify the problem in an hour, what you might have been struggling with for a longer period of time. And the fact that this has got built over a period of time, you have exposure to a much more wider cross section of industries, businesses over the last 10, 15 years. So I'm kind of far more clinical in my approach now. Am I going to learn something from this or not? If I'm going to learn something from it, well and good. If this is a company which I want to get a sense of, and there are a few, Indian companies, etc., I'm really trying to dig deep into it to figure out how does that work a bit more differently, and is it an exciting problem which is going to energize me? And then comes the commercial part of it, etc. So the cutoff on the commercial becomes very, very clear. And as I said, if you're going to make money out of it, then gone are the days when I'm going to be available to you pro. I've done that for a decade and a half now, so no more.
Yeah. No,
We've
I
all
think
been there, done
having that kind of a playbook is very, very easy to, taking that decision and helps you. And I completely agree with you, Prakash, because very recently, for example, there was a major decision I took because I really wanted to focus and go deep on one of the verticals that I'm working on. So saying no suddenly felt so liberating that, okay, now I have this additional time where I can go really deep in one of the verticals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we come to towards the end. What we'd like to end with is a piece of advice that you would have for someone who wants to start out, who's probably a fence sitter right now. And this ties back to the last question as well. The responses that both of you gave were similar. Organize better, plan better. So if I'm planning to start out, any advice for me? How do you want me to plan better? What are the things I should do?
I would just say, while you need to plan, I don't think sit on it for a very long time. Just take the plunge, right? Because mentally that also means that you probably have to elevate your risk appetite. So, right. So I would say don't sit on that for a very long time because it's like losing. It's like an opportunity cost, right? So start early if you can. Take the plunge and I mean, and I think keeping the focus is very, very important, because when you are in a corporate job, you have a very clear framework. You have a clear defined scope. But then suddenly when you are out there, it's like, you're moving away from a pond to an ocean, right? So it is very difficult to cut off those distractions. So I would say start early and stay focused. Those are the two things beyond a lot of other things that we spoke about that I would say.
It's fascinating, right? How the perception to us is moving from a pond to an ocean, whereas somebody who's on the outside, they're thinking leaving a big job is like moving from an ocean to a pond, right? Because now you're much
Yeah, very
smaller.
interesting. Yeah, true.
Yeah. Great. Any other advice, by the way? I mean, we just talked about organizing better. If not, maybe we will move.
No, I think those would be the two things, because a lot of other things we spoke among the four of us. So yeah, those would be the two things.
So I kind of have this advice depending upon what is your life stage you are in. Okay, if you are younger, my advice is contrarian, and I tend to say, listen, you don't have to be an entrepreneur just because it's fashionable. Okay, and big problems in the world are solved also in terms of being in a corporate, and corporates run innovation whether you like it or not. So I don't want you to jump into it because it is how you will attend 10 different seminars and shows and talk about people and things like that. You need to basically, the day you have something which is going to add value to the world in general, is when you should jump. If you want to be another peddling, another app peddling something, there is no future. Let him. So it's kind of a pushback which I give to them. But uh, more the more people we face is of our peer group, and for me the question over there is there a passion which you have? If you have a passion, then you should have jumped yesterday. If you don't have a passion, whether you will jump or not is going to be an ongoing discussion you will do for years till it becomes inevitable for you. So you need to first figure out, and it goes back to the identity point which I made earlier. How do you want to define yourself? Okay. If you are willing to junk your visiting card, who are you? Or what do you want to be? If you have found an answer to that question, that passion will drive you to move. If you haven't found an answer to the question, you need to figure out what else is going to define you. And it's not, yes, you know what, I'm part of the social service. I do it over my weekends. I contribute money over there and stuff like that. Those are all bullet points which you are adding in order to find your identity, but they are not going to be an identity unless and until it's a cause which you want to move in. So if you found a cause, then there should be no reason, because whether we like it or not, most of us have reached that stage where you are not really looking for the paycheck to pay your bills or put food on the table or send your kids abroad and stuff like that. Those are excuses. So the excuses, you haven't really figured out what is it that you want to do. And that is the bigger question which you need to answer, and everything else plans in place. The third thing which I want to kind of suggest is, if you have taken the jump, okay, there are two plans which you make. Okay, one is how long will it take before you reach mainstream, and how much will it cost you to maintain yourself till that time. Uh, it usually costs you twice as much, and it usually takes 3 times as much. So just budget for it. So the reason why I don't take these plans very seriously beyond a point is because the plans are plans, but effectively they never are reality. The reality changes. It's good to have those numbers in place, and you need to have a bit of a risk appetite. You need to have that leeway. You cannot be doing it in a wafer thin margin. So be prepared for it. And the fourth most important thing, sorry, and that's the last, is ensure you have a health insurance in place. Number of people I've had to take in a corner where they haven't even thought of something as simple as a health insurance because my corporate takes care of it, is is not funny. We're living in a day and time where your job is not secure, and you don't want to be landing up one fine day and realize, you know what, I have this problem and I have this 3 year kind of pre-existing window before any insurance will cover it up. So the one thing on which you should not be having any budget is an insurance plan, and you should have it yesterday. So sorry for putting that very simple, actionable as an important part of advice to everyone.
I think that's
No,
very
that
good advice.
totally.
Yeah, that last point was uh, very down to earth, but a very important element, because a lot of people don't look at that at all. Great words of advice from both of you, Prakash and Malti. Really, really appreciate. I'm pretty sure everybody's going to enjoy listening to this episode. Suman, anything from you? I'd just like to thank both of them for their time, effort, um, just being open with sharing their stories and their experiences, the vulnerability. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you. It was
much.
a
Just want
pleasure
to
chatting with all of you. Great